More than 30 empires have ruled this land. Greeks marched through its mountain passes. Persians taxed its northern plains. Sultanates built their capitals on the bones of older cities. Mughals raised marble monuments that took 20,000 workers a generation to finish. And the British, the most powerful empire in human history, governed it for nearly 200 years, extracted what economists now estimate at $45 trillion in today's money, and still, in the end, walked away. And yet, the language spoken in the Vedas, composed more than 3,000 years ago, is still recited in temples today. The same river, the Ganges, is still worshipped by the same rituals on the same stone steps. The same festival of lights, Diwali, is still lit in the same autumn month it was lit 1,000 years before Rome existed. No other civilization on Earth has been conquered this many times and survived this completely. India is not a country that endured its empires. It is a civilization that absorbed them. And the question is not whether it survived, it did. But how? How does a place that every empire tried to hold become the one thing none of them could break? The answer does not begin with any empire. It begins long before empires existed at all. In the Rann of Kutch, in the far west of Gujarat, the salt flats stretched to the horizon in every direction, white, cracked, and silent. During monsoon season, the sea floods this basin. During the dry months, it retreats, leaving behind a landscape that looks like the surface of another planet. On an island in the center of this basin, surrounded by salt, sits Dholavira, a city that was already ancient when the pyramids of Egypt were still being planned. Dholavira is one of the 5 largest cities of the Indus Valley civilization, a network of urban centers that stretched across what is now Western India and Pakistan between roughly 3,300 and 1,300 BCE. The civilization covered more than 1.2 million square kilometers, larger than the area controlled by Mesopotamia and Egypt combined. And Dholavira, built on a flat island of rock in the middle of a seasonal flood zone, solved one of the most difficult engineering problems of the ancient world. It captured rainwater. 16 reservoirs, carved into the bedrock and connected by channels, stored monsoon water for use during the dry months. The engineering was precise. The reservoirs were arranged by elevation so that overflow from one fed the next. The streets followed a grid. The bricks were uniform in size across the entire civilization, suggesting standardized production across cities separated by hundreds of kilometers. The largest Indus Valley site within India, Rakhigarhi in Haryana, covers more than 350 hectares. It has yielded granaries, jewelry, and evidence of occupation spanning from the early to the late phase of the civilization. And at Lothal, on the coast of Gujarat, archaeologists discovered the world's oldest known dockyard, an artificial basin connected to an ancient river channel designed to hold trading vessels at high tide and keep them afloat when the water dropped. The Indus Valley traded with Mesopotamia. Seals from the subcontinent have been found in the ruins of Ur. And then, around 1900 BCE, the great cities were abandoned. The monsoon shifted, the rivers dried, the people moved on. But the civilization they belonged to did not vanish. It migrated south, east, deeper into the subcontinent, It changed form. It changed language. It did not change its fundamental relationship with water, with planning, with the principle that a city is something you build to last. What followed was not a collapse. It was a transformation. The Vedic period, roughly 1500 to 500 BCE, saw the composition of the Vedas, the oldest scriptures of Hinduism. These were not written down. They were memorized by specialized reciters trained to preserve every syllable, every intonation across generations. Even as the spoken languages of the subcontinent evolved, the reciters kept the old pronunciation intact. The tradition continues today. A Vedic chant recited in a temple in Kerala in 2026 is phonetically identical to the chant as it was performed 3,000 years ago. This is not merely tradition, it is an engineering feat of human memory, and it is one of the reasons the civilization survived. When the cities fell, the knowledge did not. It was carried in the mouths of the people who remembered it. 500 kilometers southeast of Dholavira, on the banks of the Ganges, there is a city that has never been abandoned, Varanasi. Mark Twain is supposed to have called it older than history, older than tradition, older than legend. The attribution may be apocryphal, the observation is not. The city has been continuously inhabited for at least 3,000 years. Some archaeologists argue it is closer to 5,000. It predates Athens by more than a millennium. It predates Rome by 2,000 years. It was already an established center of learning and commerce when the Buddha arrived in the 6th century BCE to give his first sermon at a deer park just outside the city walls. Every morning before dawn, the ghats, the wide stone steps descending into the Ganges, begin to fill. Priests light fires. Devotees lower themselves into the water. The smoke from funeral pyres at Manikarnika Ghat rises without interruption, day and night, and has done so, by tradition, for thousands of years. Bodies are cremated in the open, on stacked wood, within sight of tourists, pilgrims, and children playing cricket on the adjacent steps. Hindus believe that to die in Varanasi is to be released from the cycle of rebirth, and so the city is full of the elderly, the sick, the dying, people who have come here not to be cured, but to be freed. There are hospices built specifically for this purpose. Some families wait weeks, some wait months. The pyres burn around the clock, consuming roughly 200 bodies a day. The Ganges itself is worshipped as a goddess, Ganga. More than 400 million people depend on the river for drinking water, irrigation, and spiritual practice. It is also one of the most polluted rivers on Earth. Untreated sewage, industrial waste, and agricultural runoff flow into it daily. Both things are true at the same time. The river is sacred. The river is dying. The rituals continue regardless, because for the people who practice them, the sacredness of the Ganges is not a statement about water quality. It is a statement about continuity. It is a statement about what you choose to hold on to when everything else changes. And it is this insistence on continuity, that no empire has ever been able to erase. The empires tried. They arrived from every direction. Alexander of Macedon crossed the Hindu Kush in 326 BCE with 40,000 soldiers. He reached the Punjab. He won battles. His soldiers, exhausted and far from home, refused to go further. Alexander turned back. He never saw the Ganges. But the empire that conquered what Alexander could not was not foreign. It was Indian. In 322 BCE, A young man named Chandragupta Maurya raised an army in the Ganges plain, overthrew the ruling Nanda dynasty, and within 2 decades built the first empire to unify most of the Indian subcontinent under a single administration. The Mauryan Empire, at its peak, stretched from Afghanistan to Bengal, from the Himalayas to the Deccan Plateau. It governed more than 50 million people, at the time roughly 1/3 of the world's population. His chief advisor, Kautilya, wrote the Arthashastra, a treatise on statecraft, economics, and military strategy so detailed and so ruthless that scholars have compared it to Machiavelli's Prince, written nearly 2,000 years later. The Arthashastra covered everything: taxation, espionage, famine management, the care of elephants in war. It was a manual for holding an empire together in a land that resists unification. But it is not Chandragupta who defines the Mauryan legacy. It is his grandson. Ashoka inherited the throne around 268 BCE. He was, by most accounts, a ruthless military commander. His early reign was marked by expansion and bloodshed. And then, in 261 BCE, he invaded the kingdom of Kalinga on the eastern coast. The Kalinga War killed more than 100,000 people. Ashoka won. And then something happened that has almost no parallel in the history of empire. He stopped. Ashoka walked the battlefield. He saw the dead. He saw the wounded. He saw the survivors mourning. And according to his own inscriptions, carved into rock in his own words, the suffering he witnessed at Kalinga filled him with remorse so deep that he renounced conquest entirely. He converted to Buddhism. He carved his edicts, instructions for ethical governance, compassion, religious tolerance, and non-violence, onto rocks and polished stone pillars and placed them across his empire. More than 30 of these pillars still stand. Some are more than 15 meters tall, each topped with a carved capital. His lion capital, 4 lions facing outward on a circular pedestal, became the emblem of the Republic of India in 1950, more than 2,000 years after it was carved. The wheel beneath the lions, the Ashoka Chakra, sits at the center of the Indian flag. An emperor who renounced violence. His symbol, adopted by the democracy that followed. The continuity is not a coincidence. It is a choice. Buddhism was born in India, so were Hinduism, Jainism, and Sikhism. 4 of the world's major religions originated in this single subcontinent. And yet Buddhism, the faith that Ashoka spread across Asia, the faith that shaped the art, philosophy, and governance of nations from Sri Lanka to Japan, virtually disappeared from India itself within a few centuries. It was not suppressed by force, it was gradually absorbed, its ideas woven back into the Hindu philosophical framework from which it had emerged. India does not destroy what it encounters, it absorbs it. That is the pattern. But Buddhism did not vanish entirely. In the far north, where the Himalayas rise into Ladakh, the faith persists in a landscape so stark it looks like the surface of the moon. Ladakh sits at an average elevation of more than 3,500 meters. The air is thin. The sky is so clear that the stars at night cast shadows. And scattered across this high desert, perched on cliffs and wedged into gorges, are Buddhist monasteries, gompas, some of which have been occupied for more than 1,000 years. Hemi's monastery, founded in 1672, houses monks who perform masked dances each summer to celebrate the birth of the tantric Buddhist master, Padmasambhava. Thixi Monastery, built on a hill overlooking the Indus Valley, is 12 stories tall and holds a 15-meter statue of the Maitreya Buddha, the Buddha of the future, whose eyes look out across the same river that watered the Indus Valley civilization 4,000 years ago. Ladakh was its own kingdom until 1834, when the Dogra dynasty of Jammu conquered it. It became part of India only at partition, and its monasteries, among the last living repositories of Tibetan Buddhist culture, carry a knowledge system that has been passed from teacher to student, unbroken, for centuries. The continuity here is not Hindu. It is not the Ganges. It is a different thread of the same pattern. Knowledge held in place by the people who choose to transmit it. But not all inhabitants of this land move through temples and cities. Some move through the forest on 4 legs, in silence, visible only in the early morning or the last hour of light. In the forests of Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, where teak and bamboo grow thick enough to block the midday sun, the Bengal tiger still hunts. The tiger is an ambush predator. It does not chase. It waits, sometimes for hours, concealed in tall grass or behind a screen of undergrowth. When it strikes, it covers the distance in a few explosive strides. Its prey, samba deer, chital, wild boar, often does not hear it until it is too late. In 2006, India's tiger population had fallen to fewer than 1,500, a catastrophic decline driven by poaching, habitat loss, and the collapse of prey populations. The animal that had roamed these forests for tens of thousands of years was disappearing. In some reserves, entire breeding populations were wiped out in a single year, poached for bones, sold in traditional medicine markets across East Asia. By 2024, the count had risen to 3,682. India now holds roughly 75% of the world's wild tigers. The recovery, driven by protected reserves like Ranthambore, Corbett, and Bandhavgarh, and by anti-poaching patrols willing to use lethal force, is one of the most significant conservation achievements of the modern era. The tiger survived because someone decided it mattered enough to protect. That is not an inevitability, it is a choice, the same kind of choice that runs through the entire history of this land. What do you keep? What do you let go? The empires that followed Ashoka made their own choices. After the Mauryan decline, India fragmented, as it has done repeatedly between empires. Regional kingdoms rose and fell across the Deccan and the south. The Cholas, based in what is now Tamil Nadu, built a naval empire that reached the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra. At the peak of their power in the 11th century, the Cholas controlled the sea lanes of the Indian Ocean and collected tribute from kingdoms across Southeast Asia. Their engineering was as ambitious as their reach. At Thanjavur, the Chola king Rajaraja I commissioned the Brihadiswara temple, completed in 1010 CE. It is built entirely of granite. The tower, the Vimana, rises 66 meters and is capped with an 80-ton stone that was hauled to the top using a 4-mile-long earthen ramp. No binding agent holds the stones together. They are held in place by gravity, by precision, by the sheer weight of the thing itself. 1,000 years later, the temple still stands. The tower has not shifted. The stone has not cracked. The engineering is so precise that the shadow of the tower never falls on its own base. The Pallavas left behind shore temples at Mahabalipuram that still face the Bay of Bengal. The Chalukyas carved cave temples at Badami. The Pandyas ruled from Madurai, where the Meenakshi temple, its towers encrusted with thousands of painted sculptures, is still one of the most active places of worship in India. And then came the Gupta Empire, roughly 320 to 550 CE, what historians call the Golden Age of India. Under the Guptas, Indian mathematicians developed the concept of zero and the decimal system, the foundation of all modern mathematics. Aryabhata, working in the city of Pataliputra, calculated the circumference of the Earth to within 70 kilometers of the modern measurement, more than 1,000 years before European astronomers reached comparable accuracy. He proposed that the Earth rotated on its axis. He calculated the length of the solar year to within minutes. At Nalanda in Bihar, a Buddhist university enrolled more than 10,000 students from across Asia. The campus covered 12 hectares. It had libraries, dormitories, meditation halls, and lecture rooms. Chinese scholars traveled there along the Silk Road. Its library, when it was finally destroyed by invaders in 1193, is said to have burned for 3 months. The knowledge produced during this period did not stay in India. The decimal system reached Baghdad by the 8th century and Europe by the 12th. The numbers the Western world calls Arabic numerals are in fact Indian. But the physical evidence of the Golden Age is not only in texts, it is carved into rock. In the Western Ghats of Maharashtra, a horseshoe-shaped cliff face drops into a ravine lined with fig trees and the sound of falling water. Cut into this cliff are 30 caves, the Ajanta Caves, excavated between the 2nd century BCE and the 6th century CE. The paintings inside are among the oldest surviving works of art in India. Buddhist monks carved monasteries and prayer halls directly into the basalt, then covered the walls and ceilings with scenes from the Jataka tales, the stories of the Buddha's previous lives. The pigments, made from ground minerals, plant dyes, and lamp black, have survived nearly 2,000 years in the dark. Some of the faces are so finely rendered that art historians compare them to the frescoes of the Italian Renaissance, painted more than 1,000 years later. 60 kilometers away, at Ellora, the Kailasa temple stands as something that should not exist. It was not built, it was subtracted. Beginning at the top of the cliff and working downward, sculptors removed an estimated 200,000 tons of rock to reveal a freestanding temple, the largest monolithic structure in the world. The temple is dedicated to Shiva. It is surrounded by galleries, bridges, and carved elephants that emerge from the bedrock as if they had always been there. There are no joins, there are no seams. The entire structure is a single piece of the mountain. The Kailasa temple was carved during the Rashtrakuta dynasty, roughly the 8th century CE. By then, empires had been rising and falling across India for more than 2,000 years. And yet, here was a dynasty that chose to carve a mountain into a temple. The ambition was not about display, it was about permanence. So how did it happen? How did a civilization this old, this rooted, this certain of its own identity fall to foreign conquest? The answer is not that India was weak. The answer is that India was rich. In the southwestern corner of the subcontinent, where the Western Ghats slope into the Arabian Sea, the coast of Kerala has been a magnet for foreign trade for more than 2,000 years. Roman coins have been found in Kerala's soil, hordes of them buried in the earth along ancient trade routes. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century CE, complained that Rome was hemorrhaging gold to India in exchange for pepper and silk. Arab dhows crossed the Arabian Sea to buy pepper, cardamom, cinnamon, and cloves from the harbors of Kochi and Calicut. The spice trade was not a sideshow. It was one of the most profitable commercial networks in the ancient world, and India sat at its center. When Vasco da Gama landed at Calicut in 1498, he was asked what he had come for. He said, "Christians and spices." The Portuguese established trading posts along the coast. They built churches in Goa that still stand, whitewashed facades in a tropical landscape, organs still playing in the nave. They were followed by the Dutch, who took Kochi, then the French, who settled Pondicherry, then the English, who arrived last and stayed longest. Each came for the same reason: India's wealth. By the 16th century, India accounted for roughly a quarter of the world's gross domestic product, more than all of Europe combined. The empires that came to trade stayed to rule, and the mechanics of that transition are visible in the ruins of a single city.
Hampi,
in the southern state of Karnataka, was once the capital of the Vijayanagara Empire, a kingdom that controlled most of peninsular India for more than 2 centuries. At its peak in the early 16th century, Hampi was one of the largest cities in the world. Some estimates put its population at 500,000. Persian and Portuguese travelers described it as a place of extraordinary wealth. Markets selling diamonds weighed on brass scales in open bazaars, elephants draped in silk and gold, parading through the streets. In 1565, a coalition of neighboring sultanates defeated Vijayanagara at the Battle of Talikota. The victorious armies sacked Hampi for 6 months. They destroyed temples, smashed sculptures, burned granaries, scattered the population. The city was never rebuilt. Today, Hampi's ruins stretch across 26 square kilometers of boulder-strewn landscape on the banks of the Tungabhadra River. Temples stand without roofs. Carved pillars lean at angles. The stone chariot in the Vitala temple complex, a freestanding structure carved to look like a chariot drawn by stone elephants, is one of the most photographed ruins in India. Tap the musical pillars beside it, and they ring, each one tuned to a different note. But Hampi is not just a monument to loss. It is a monument to the pattern, the recurring pattern that defines this land. Something is built, something is destroyed, something is built again. Nowhere is that pattern more visible than in Delhi. The city most people call Delhi is not one city. It is at least 7, layered on top of one another across a landscape of ridges and riverbeds south of the Yamuna. Each empire that tried to hold India built its capital here, and each one built it on the ruins of the last. The first was Lal Kot, founded by the Rajput Tomar dynasty in the 8th century. The Delhi Sultanate replaced it with Siri, then Tughlaqabad, then Firozabad, each fortress city rising as the previous one crumbled. The Mughals built Shahjahanabad, the walled city around the Red Fort, in the 17th century. And the British built New Delhi, Edwin Lutyen's imperial grid of sandstone government buildings and wide, tree-lined avenues, completed in 1931. Stand on the ridge that runs through southern Delhi, and you can see layers of 1,000 years of occupation in every direction. The Qutub Minar, a 73-meter tower built in 1193 from the stones of demolished Hindu and Jain temples, rises from one end. Its courtyard contains an iron pillar that has resisted corrosion for more than 1,600 years. The iron's purity, more than 98%, is something modern metallurgists still study. Nobody knows exactly how it was forged. Below the ridge, the ruins of Tughlaqabad spread across a rocky plateau, a fortress so massive and so quickly abandoned that locals say the city was cursed. Muhammad bin Tughlaq, the sultan who built it, once tried to relocate the entire population of Delhi to a new capital, 1,500 kilometers to the south. The march killed thousands. The experiment failed. He marched them back. Delhi is the city that proves the rule. The empires changed, the location did not. Something about this spot on the Yamuna plain, its position on trade routes, its access to the Gangetic heartland, its defensive ridges, made it the place every ruler wanted. And every ruler who took it built on what came before, because destroying it entirely would have meant starting from nothing. Not every kingdom that tried to resist the empires left a city. Some left a cliff. In Rajasthan, on the edge of the Thar Desert, the fortress of Chittorgarh rises from a flat-topped hill more than 500 feet above the plain. It is the largest fort in India, covering nearly 300 hectares, and it embodies a word that has no easy English translation: Jauhar. 3 times in its history, Chittorgarh was besieged. 3 times, the defenders lost. And 3 times, rather than surrender to the invaders, the women of the fort, queens, wives, mothers, daughters, walked into a mass funeral pyre. The men then rode out in saffron robes to fight to the death. The first Jauhar was in 1303, during the siege by Alauddin Khalji. The second in 1535, by the Sultan of Gujarat. The third in 1568, by the Mughal Emperor Akbar, the same Akbar who preached tolerance and religious synthesis. Chittorgarh is not celebrated as a military victory. It is remembered as a refusal, a community's determination to choose death over subjugation. Whether that choice should be honored or mourned is a question India still asks. On the coast of Odisha, another kind of defiance survives, not military, but architectural. The Konark Sun Temple, built in the 13th century by King Narasimhadeva I, was designed as a massive stone chariot dedicated to the sun god Surya. 12 pairs of carved wheels, each more than 3 meters in diameter, line its base. 24 spokes radiate from each hub, and they function as sundials. 800 years later, they still tell time. Much of the temple has collapsed over the centuries. Its main tower fell long ago. But the wheels remain. The horses remain, the carvings of daily life, musicians, dancers, lovers, soldiers remain. The structure was built to mirror the movement of the sun across the sky. The light still falls where the builders intended. Deep in the evergreen forests of the Western Ghats, where the canopy closes overhead and sunlight reaches the forest floor in scattered patches, a primate moves through the upper branches with a deliberate, unhurried gait. The lion-tailed macaque is found nowhere else on Earth. It is endemic to the Western Ghats, a mountain range older than the Himalayas, running 1,600 kilometers along India's southwestern coast. The macaque is distinguished by a silver-white mane that frames its dark face and a tail tipped with a black tuft that gives it its name. Fewer than 4,000 remain. They live in fragmented patches of rainforest, separated by tea and coffee plantations that were first cleared during the colonial era. Each fragment holds a small population, genetically isolated from the others. The macaque's survival depends on corridors, strips of forest that connect the fragments and allow populations to mix. The Western Ghats themselves are one of the planet's 8 most critical biodiversity hotspots. Older than the Himalayas by tens of millions of years, they intercept the southwest monsoon and generate the rainfall that feeds most of peninsular India's rivers. 90% of the amphibians found here exist nowhere else. The forests harbor species that have been evolving in isolation since the subcontinent broke away from Gondwana, a biological inheritance more than 100 million years in the making. In the understory, where rotting logs meet damp leaf litter, another kind of survival plays out at a different scale. The atlas moth, one of the largest insects on Earth, with a wingspan that can exceed 25 centimeters, emerges from its cocoon in the forests of northeastern India. It has no mouth. It cannot eat. It lives for roughly 2 weeks, fueled entirely by the fat it stored as a caterpillar. In that time, it mates, lays eggs, and dies. The tips of its wings are shaped and colored to resemble the heads of snakes, a defense against birds that works even after death when the moth's wings lie open on the forest floor. Elsewhere in the subcontinent, where the Ganges and the Brahmaputra pour into the Bay of Bengal, the world's largest mangrove forest grows in the space between land and sea, the Sundarbans. It is the only place on Earth where Bengal tigers swim. They move between islands, crossing saltwater channels, hunting spotted deer in the tidal mud. The forest itself is sinking, sea levels rising centimeter by centimeter, salt water creeping inland, drowning the roots that hold everything together. The Sundarbans is India in miniature, a place where life and loss occupy the same territory, where what endures does so not because it was protected, but because it refused to stop. The empire that most fully tried to hold India was not the first, but it was the most ambitious. The Mughal Empire arrived in 1526, when Babur, a descendant of both Timur and Genghis Khan, defeated the Sultan of Delhi at the First Battle of Panipat with a force outnumbered 10-1. Babur had something his enemies did not: gunpowder.
Akbar was illiterate.
He could neither read nor write, and yet he built one of the most sophisticated administrative systems of the medieval world. He divided the empire into provinces, standardized taxation, commissioned a census, and, most remarkably, invited scholars from every major religion to debate at his court in a hall called the Ibadat Khana, the house of worship. He married a Rajput princess in a political alliance that brought Hindu kingdoms into the Mughal fold without military conquest. He abolished the jizya, the tax on non-Muslims. He created a new faith, Din-e-Ilahi, that attempted to synthesize elements of Hinduism, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Jainism into a single system. It did not survive him. Almost none of the synthesis emperors build survives the emperor. The empire went on, the idea did not. But the architecture did. Akbar's abandoned capital at Fatehpur Sikri, a city built entirely of red sandstone, occupied for only 14 years before the water supply failed, still stands in the plains west of Agra. Its courtyards, audience halls, and the massive Buland Darwaza, the Gate of Magnificence, 54 meters tall, are empty now. The city was not destroyed, it was simply left behind. And 80 kilometers to the east, on the bank of the Yamuna River, stands the monument that Akbar's grandson built for a woman who died giving birth to their 14th child. The Taj Mahal took 22 years, 20,000 workers, and more than 1,000 elephants to build. Its white marble was brought from Rajasthan, 300 kilometers away. Its jade and crystal came from China, its turquoise from Tibet, its lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, its sapphires from Sri Lanka. The inlay work, flowers, vines, and Quranic verses set into the marble using the pietra dura technique required craftsmen from across the empire and beyond. Shah Jahan intended to build a matching black marble mausoleum for himself across the river. He never did. His son, Aurangzeb, deposed him in 1658 and imprisoned him in Agra Fort, where he spent his final 8 years looking across the Yamuna at the tomb he had built for his wife. From his window, the Taj Mahal was the last thing he saw each evening before the light failed. After Aurangzeb's death in 1707, the Mughal Empire began to fracture. Aurangzeb had reversed Akbar's tolerance, reimposing the jizya, destroying Hindu temples, waging wars of expansion that drained the treasury. Regional governors declared independence. The Marathas expanded from the west. The Sikhs consolidated power in the Punjab. And a trading company, a private corporation chartered by the English crown in 1600, began to see an opportunity. In the floodplains of Assam, where the Brahmaputra River spreads across a landscape of tall elephant grass and seasonal wetlands, the greater one-horned rhinoceros moves through the water with a slow, armored certainty that makes it look like something left over from a much older world. At the beginning of the 20th century, fewer than 200 remained. Poached for their horns, valued in traditional medicine markets across Asia, and pushed out of their habitat by tea plantations and settlements, they were heading toward extinction. Today, the population has recovered to more than 3,260, roughly 70% of them in Kaziranga National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site in the Brahmaputra floodplain. The park is also home to Asian elephants, wild water buffalo, swamp deer, and one of the highest densities of Bengal tigers in India. The recovery took decades of anti-poaching patrols, habitat restoration, and a government willing to treat the killing of a rhino as a serious crime. The rhinoceros has lived in these floodplains for millions of years. Its survival into the 21st century was not guaranteed. It was fought for, the same way every durable thing in this civilization has been fought for. The British did not arrive in India as conquerors. They arrived as merchants. The East India Company established its first trading post in Surat in 1613, with permission from the Mughal Emperor Jahangir. For more than a century, the company traded textiles, spices, and opium. It built warehouses, it hired local soldiers, sepoys, to guard them. And then, on June 23, 1757, Robert Clive leads 3,000 men against Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Nawab of Bengal, at the Battle of Plassey. The Nawab has 50,000 soldiers. He loses not because of superior British arms, but because his own general, Mir Jafar, has been bribed to withhold his troops. Plassey is not a great battle. It is a transaction, and it hands Bengal, the richest province in India, to a private company. Over the next century, the East India Company expands its control across the subcontinent through a combination of military force, strategic alliances, and the systematic dismantling of Indian manufacturing. Indian weavers who had supplied cotton textiles to the world are taxed into poverty. Raw cotton is shipped to Manchester, processed in British mills, and sold back to India as finished cloth. In 1750, India produces roughly a quarter of the world's manufactured goods. By 1900, it produces less than 2%. The drain was not just economic. The colonial census classified Indians by caste and religion in rigid categories that hardened what had previously been more fluid social identities. The British did not invent caste. It existed in complex and varied forms for centuries. But the census froze it. It made it administrative. It made it the lens through which every Indian was seen, counted, and governed. On April 13, 1919, in the city of Amritsar, thousands of men, women, and children gather in a walled garden called Jallianwala Bagh. They are there to celebrate Baisakhi, a spring harvest festival. Some are also protesting the Rowlatt Act, which allows the British to imprison Indians without trial. Brigadier General Reginald Dyer arrives with 90 soldiers. He orders the exits blocked. Without warning, the soldiers open fire. They fire for 10 minutes. They fire 1,650 rounds into the crowd. The garden has only a few narrow exits. People climb the walls. People jump into a well that later yields more than 100 bodies. Official British reports acknowledge 379 dead. Indian sources estimate more than 1,000. Dyer later testified that his intention was to produce a moral effect on the population. He was censured but never prosecuted. The British House of Lords voted against his removal. A public fund in Britain raised £26,000 in his honour. For many Indians, Jallianwala Bagh was the moment the relationship with Britain became irreparable. Not because of the violence — India had endured violence from every empire — but because of the impunity, because the empire did not consider what it had done to be wrong. The answer came from a man who had spent 21 years in South Africa before returning to India in 1915. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, Mahatma, the great soul, did not fight the British Empire with armies. He fought it with refusal. He called the method satyagraha, truth force. The principle was that you do not cooperate with a system that is unjust, and you accept the consequences of your refusal without violence. You make the empire's cruelty visible by refusing to hide from it. On March 12, 1930, Gandhi and 78 followers left Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad and began walking south. They were going to the coastal town of Dandi, 240 miles away. They were going to make salt. The British had monopolized salt production in India. Indians were prohibited from collecting or selling it. The tax on salt affected every person in the country, rich and poor, Hindu and Muslim, young and old. It was the most democratic injustice the British had created, and Gandhi understood that attacking it would unite India in a way that no political argument could. He walked for 24 days. Villages along the route emptied as people joined the march. By the time he reached Dandi on April 5th, tens of thousands had followed. The next morning he bent down, picked up a lump of natural salt from the mudflats, and broke the law.
The response was swift.
More than 60,000 people were arrested across India. At the Dharasana salt works, 2,500 unarmed marchers approached the gates in rows and were beaten by police with steel-tipped clubs. They did not fight back. They did not run. Each row advanced, was beaten, and was carried away. The next row advanced. An American journalist named Webb Miller witnessed it. His report was published in over 1,300 newspapers worldwide. It described men walking calmly into violence and accepting it without retaliation. The Salt March did not immediately free India, but it changed the story. It showed the world what British rule in India actually looked like, and it showed India what it was capable of becoming. What followed was the darkest chapter. In 1943, while British India was supplying soldiers and resources to the war against Japan in Southeast Asia, a famine struck Bengal. The monsoon was poor. The Japanese occupation of Burma had cut off rice imports. British wartime policies diverted grain to military stockpiles and prioritized the feeding of soldiers over civilians. Inflation pushed the price of rice beyond the reach of ordinary people. Between 2 and 3 million Bengalis died of starvation and disease. Families disintegrated. Men sold their farms and joined the army because it was the only way to eat. Women and children became migrants, walking to Calcutta to beg for food. The streets of the city were lined with the dying. Winston Churchill, when told of the famine, is reported to have asked why Gandhi had not yet died. He described Indians in terms that do not bear repeating. Australia and Canada offered food aid. Churchill's war cabinet declined to divert shipping. The Bengal famine was not a natural disaster. It was a governance failure, the failure of an empire that had stopped seeing its subjects as people whose lives were worth the cost of a grain shipment. And then came partition. On August 15, 1947, the British withdrew, but they did not leave India whole. A British lawyer named Cyril Radcliffe, who had never visited India, who had no knowledge of its demographics or geography, was given 5 weeks to draw a border that would divide the subcontinent into 2 nations. Hindu-majority areas on one side, Muslim-majority areas on the other. The line cut through communities, through villages, through families who had lived together for generations. In Punjab, the border split the province in half. In Bengal, it did the same. Neighbors became foreigners overnight. In the months that followed, between 1 and 2 million people were killed in communal violence. Hindu against Muslim, Muslim against Hindu, Sikh against both. 15 million were displaced, the largest mass migration in human history. Trains arriving in Lahore and Amritsar carried nothing but corpses. Women were abducted, assaulted, killed. Children disappeared. Gandhi did not celebrate independence. He spent August 15, 1947, in Calcutta, fasting, trying to stop the killing. 5 months later, on January 30, 1948, he was shot 3 times in the chest by Nathuram Godse, a Hindu nationalist who believed Gandhi had been too sympathetic to Muslims. The man who freed India with salt and silence was killed by his own countrymen. The last Mughal emperor had died 86 years earlier. Bahadur Shah Zafar II was 82 years old when the rebellion of 1857 swept across northern India. Sepoys who had mutinied against the East India Company marched to Delhi and declared him emperor, a title that had been ceremonial for decades. He was reluctant. He was frail. He had no army of his own. The British recaptured Delhi within months. Bahadur Shah was tried for treason, stripped of his title, and exiled to Rangoon, Burma. He died in a small room in 1862. He was buried in an unmarked grave. His tomb was not identified until 1991. His last poem, written in captivity, says that he could not even find 2 yards of land in the beloved lane of his ancestors for his burial. The Mughal Empire had lasted 331 years. The British Raj lasted 89. The civilization that preceded them both has lasted more than 5,000. In the Gir forest of Gujarat, where dry, deciduous woodland gives way to thorn scrub and the air smells of dust and acacia, a predator survives that has vanished everywhere else on Earth. The Asiatic lion is smaller than its African cousin. Its mane is shorter. It carries a distinctive fold of skin along its belly, and it exists in the wild in only one place: a single forest in a single state in the western corner of India. At the beginning of the 20th century, fewer than 50 Asiatic lions survived. Hunting and habitat loss had pushed them to the edge of extinction. Today, the population has grown to 891, a recovery spanning more than a century, sustained across 2 world wars, a partition, a famine, and the birth of a democracy. That the Asiatic lion still exists is a choice, the same kind of choice that Ashoka carved into stone, that Gandhi walked 240 miles to make, that the monks at Ajanta made when they decided to paint stories on the walls of caves in the dark. What remains after the empires? The language remains: Hindi, Bengali, Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, Gujarati, Kannada, Malayalam, Odia, Punjabi. 22 officially recognized languages, more than 19,000 dialects. Sanskrit, the ancestor of most of them, is still taught, still recited, still used in ceremony, 3,000 years after it was first spoken. The faiths remain: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, all born here. Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, all absorbed here, layered into the civilization without erasing what came before. In Kochi, a synagogue built in 1568 stands next to a Hindu temple. In Delhi, a Sikh Gurdwara serves free meals to 30,000 people a day, regardless of their faith. The rituals remain. The Ganges is still worshipped at dawn. The Kumbh Mela, the largest peaceful gathering of human beings on Earth, still draws more than 100 million people to bathe in sacred rivers, as it has for centuries. In Madurai, the Meenakshi Temple's evening ceremony closes the temple doors each night and reopens them each morning, as it has done for 1,000 years. India is not a country that was built by one empire and handed down. It is a civilization that was built by thousands of communities, over thousands of years, in thousands of languages, in the face of every conceivable attempt to simplify it into something a single ruler could hold. No one could hold it. Not because it resisted, though it did. Not because it fought, though it did that too. But because the thing they were trying to hold was never one thing. It was always many things at once: Hindu and Muslim and Buddhist and Jain and Sikh and Christian, Northern and Southern and Eastern and Western, ancient and modern, sacred and profane, broken and rebuilt and broken and rebuilt again. The empires came with armies and ledgers and borders. The civilization answered with temples and languages and rituals and recipes and songs, and the quiet insistence that a prayer performed every morning for 3,000 years is more durable than any army, more lasting than any border, more permanent than any flag. The Cholas came and went, the Sultanates came and went, the Mughals came and went, the British came and went. Each left something behind: a tower, a tomb, a railway, a legal system, a wound. And the civilization took what it could use, discarded what it could not, and kept moving. Perhaps that is what civilization means: not the ability to conquer, but the ability to continue. Not the power to hold, but the willingness to remain. Not the refusal to change, but the knowledge of what to keep unchanged. India remains. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.